All right, well, it is 12 o'clock, so I guess we will get started as people are trickling in. Welcome everyone to the Rainforest, Alberta's Lunch Without Lunch. I am Amber Rowden, community storyteller at Rainforest Alberta. If you do not know me, that is who I am. I am very excited for today's Lunch Without Lunch. I'm going to pass it over to Gail to give us a quick introduction to Rainforest. And yeah, Gail, I will pass it over.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I trust you'll be working the controls with the PowerPoint.
Oh, yes, I can do that.
Even though we all know the song, which is great. So I'm very pleased to be talking to you today. My name's Gail Powley. I'm president of Technology Alberta, and very excited as always to see all the great and growing tech community across the province. So Rainforest 101 is that we are all here developing this community of collaborators, inventors, investors, entrepreneurs, and everyone who supports that growth to, if you will, with the analogy of the rainforest, by just bringing the elements together, thriving communities evolve. So that's the context. As much as we love farms, being in the prairies, there are places for farms which are wonderful for production. We believe that innovation is really when there's more of a randomness and allowing collisions to occur and people to collaborate. And collaboration is definitely what one of the core values is. So as you can see, I have gone full speed ahead, Amber. I think we're done. No. If you could just do move ahead about 3 slides. So our vision and mission, and of course there was the social contract. If anyone hasn't signed the social contract, please do. That will give you access to the Slack channel. And there was recently a Rainforest Summit. In fact, Amber, is someone going to give us an update from that summit? It was just last week.
Yeah, we are in the midst of getting reports and everything from that. So we sent out an email from everyone that attended. The video went out and a survey on how you paid it forward. So we sent that out, and then we're going to have some reports and also the graphic coming out as soon as we have that finished, another email. So we will be reporting back to the community very soon.
Excellent. So the summits are held once or twice a year. There's a scorecard that the community assesses to determine whether, and give us some feedback about whether collaboration has improved and in what areas that we need to have greater focus so that we have improvement to having, again, this vision of the thriving tech sector that can exist here in Alberta for the purpose of economic prosperity, sustainability, growth, and really diversifying our economy overall. So with that in mind, I would love to hear again many people on this call would have been at the summit, and it's such a great time to get community leaders together. I would love to hear a couple of comments on it before we actually move over to our speaker today. Is there anyone who wants to add a few words, Brent or others?
I thought it was well run. That was my first summit. Great participation. We had asked in advance that everyone eliminate distractions, and I think everyone did. I think everyone brought their whole self, which was awesome to see for sure.
Excellent.
Dave, it wasn't the same as the in-person ones, but like Brent said, it was very well done, as best can be done when you can't shake hands, as it were.
Right. So that will be something that we're all looking for sure. So if anyone has any comments on the summit or on anything today, please put your comments in the chat or put your hand up. But with that, I just welcome everyone today, and I will turn it over to Amber again to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Gail. And I apologize for the slides. I'm very technology not prepared today, apparently. So apologies in advance. But thank you for that introduction, Gail. So I'm very excited for our panel and our speakers today. We are exploring the world of UX. So I want to introduce Susanna Toss. I knew this. See, I'm thrown off. Susanna Toss.
All good.
So she is a multidisciplinary creative designer who believes life offers endless opportunities to explore how we can meet the real needs of real people. Susanna's experience in software development, project management, human-computer interaction, education, design, empathy, emotional intelligence, Indigenous studies, neurodiversity, research and advocacy, as well as her international travels, provide a rich and diverse background to draw from. She seeks to inspire, engage, and empower people in realizing their vision through user-centric design. Susanna is a professional educator and a member of Calgary UX, the Interaction Design Foundation, and an IDEOU alumni recognized as a community catalyst. Susanna fell in love with Rainforest, Alberta through the social contract and enjoys being part of the community. I'm excited to learn more about UX from Susanna, and she has an awesome panel with her today. So Susanna, without further ado, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Amber. I appreciate that. And this is my first time moderating one of these events, so I'm very excited and honored and happy. So let's see how it goes. I'm also very honored to be able to introduce our panelists. We have Lwol May. He had reached out to the UX community to find a couple of people that would be really great for us to talk with. So I'd like to introduce, first of all, Rebecca Harper, UX strategist and information architect. Rebecca has been making a name for herself in the UX strategy and design space since 2011. After graduating with a Master of Library and Information Study from UBC, Rebecca got curious about non-traditional library careers and joined the BC government's UX design team, where her passion for information architecture, content strategy, and end-to-end service strategy and design was ignited. She has since gone on to own 2 highly successful UX design consulting agencies and spent the last 2 years bringing her skills and passion to the University of Queensland in Australia. Back in Canada again, Rebecca is excited to have relaunched her consultancy agency and is hard at work with a number of clients with intriguing challenges to tackle. When she's not hard at work solving her clients' challenges, you'll find Rebecca spending time with her many nieces and nephews, reading a good book or out for a walk along the South Saskatchewan River with her dog. Please welcome Rebecca.
Thank you very much.
And then I'm going to introduce our second panelist. Paul Nishikawa, product design, user experience, user research, and digital strategy. Over 25 years of building online and digital experiences from back end to front end and everything in between. Paul has been focused on bridging gaps between business and their customers. He has helped stakeholders, developers, and other team members get on the same page to evolve their products and services. The extensive research and product experience he has consistently derived great user-centric outcomes with simple and repeatable design practices. From co-founding and leading UX guys through projects with some of Canada's leading companies to working with startups and founders pre-release, Paul has researched, concept, and designed usable and engaging products and experiences. Currently with the Digital Innovation Office of the Government of Alberta as a service designer, Paul is working on tools to better serve Albertans and create better days at work for employees, primarily focused on initiatives with the Children's Services Ministry. Welcome, Paul. And we have Lewis here too on the board, I see. And Lewis is such a sweetheart. I can't say enough nice things about Lewis. He is kind of the I don't want to say completely runs the show with Calgary UX, but he is such a kind-hearted and such a community catalyst and really an amazing UX person. So it is wonderful to have here and excited to start the conversation. So Miss Rebecca, I was wondering, would you let us know, how did you get into this whole world of UX and how did you arrive at the place you are now?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit in my introduction, or you mentioned it a little bit in my introduction. In 2009, I went to library school and I was going to be a librarian. And I thought that was going to be this fantastic career. And then as I started going through library school, I realized that I didn't necessarily love a lot of the aspects of traditional librarianship, and it didn't really appeal to me in a great way, but that the digital world needed librarians too, and that there's a large amount of information and growing every day that needed to be organized and harnessed in some way that made it actually useful and usable. So when I graduated in 2011, I joined the user experience design team at the government of British Columbia. They were doing absolutely revolutionary things with how government information is shared with services, with citizens. And I stayed on with them as an employee and as a contractor for about 4 years. And then I moved to Calgary, which inevitably led to a bit of a job change where I started my own consulting company and consulted to organizations both in Calgary as well as elsewhere in North America, and spent a lot of time just kind of building up my practice and learning the ropes of not only owning my own business, but also progressing through my career as a UX designer. And then in the last 2 years, I went to Australia on an incredible adventure. And I worked at the University of Queensland on a really major initiative that they had around a really robust customer experience program. And then I've recently come back and I started my own consulting company again in January. And actually just 2 weeks ago, I signed on as a full-time employee with one of my clients.
Oh, congratulations.
They persuaded me to come on board as an employee again. So I'm working there, applying lots of the knowledge that I gained from library school, as well as everything I've kind of gathered along the way in the last 10 years.
And when in terms of like coming into UX, was that like a clear path for you?
It wasn't. So interestingly enough, I was working at just an IT consulting firm as a receptionist, as kind of a temporary job in between getting my real career going. And through that employment, I made connections within the BC government, and those doors were then opened through that. It hadn't really been on my radar at that point. But actually, the folks that Paul is working with at the Digital Innovation Office, 2 of them came from the BC government, and they just kind of said, hey, like, you've got these skills. We think it would be really valuable. Why don't you come and join our team? So it was really at their persuasion that I joined, and I'm so thankful that I did.
So I take it you like it.
I love it. I wouldn't do it full time if I didn't love it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. Paul, could you let us know how you got into the UX career?
Sure. So when I started in digital in 1995, and so user experience wasn't coined as a term really. I mean, we had human computer interface and we had all sorts of other wonderful terms. And I was doing digital design and started to document what our digital design projects were doing with the marketing agency I was working at in different ways. And a lot of them are analogous to deliverables we do now, but I was just kind of making it up as I went along. And as the digital industry evolved and we got Jesse James Garrett's wonderful framework and things started to get names, I realized that the part that I enjoyed the most was user experience. But I had lots of fun doing all the different parts as this was evolving, and ended up, I guess the first time I was hired as a UX designer would have been Critical Mass in 2004, but I had been doing it for a long time before that, through a number of roles. Then in 2007, or before that, I worked as a product manager and an interaction designer at NetTeller. Lisa knows that company well. And ended up starting co-founding UX Guys with one of my colleagues at NetTeller, and we ran that for 12 years. And I worked with some really amazing people who did all sorts of great projects for companies large and small. I see 1 or 2 folks from my past in the participant list here. I went to consulting a couple of years ago and fell into this DIO role about a year ago. But I've been a generalist. I've had to do research. I've had to do interaction design, a lot of strategic interactions and workshopping and that kind of thing. And quite frankly, I've kind of enjoyed all of it. So I haven't really haven't stopped doing any part of it and specialized because it's just all too much fun. So
oh, that's
there you
awesome.
go.
Thank you very much for sharing. I want to dive straight into the topic of UX. And I'm going to ask the question, what is UX and what is not UX? Who would like to start?
I'll give it a go.
Awesome.
I'll dive into the second question you asked, because I think it's easier to capture really what it's not than what it is in a lot of ways. And something that I've seen a lot, particularly during my time in Australia, was the assumption that UX is user interface, UI. And yes, user interface is part of the user experience, but it's not all of it. There's a lot more that falls beyond just the visual presentation on the screen. There's a lot more work that goes into it than just, a visual designer making something that looks pretty and that's usable. I think it's an end-to-end examination of touch points, information resources, and a variety of other things that is kind of the culmination of all of that is a holistic experience that covers every part that a user would really undergo in their journey to get information or acquire a service or buy a product or things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying, like the full spectrum, like when does that start? Like when does UX start in the process?
One, ideally.
Ideally.
Paul?
Do you want to add to that?
Sure, with an idea. I mean, once you have an idea that actually interacts with someone, if it's a business or a social enterprise or whatever it is, that experience has to create value for whoever's using it. And really user experience is about understanding what those value propositions are and translating those into usually in our world, a digital experience, and making it work for both, the whoever's building that experience and whoever's experiencing it. And I was going to say, my side of the what is UX as opposed to what it's not would be when, a lot of it is just the same kind of process that you see in lean startup. It's learning, it's building, it's testing, and then iterating and collaborating until you get to something that works. And unless you have the user involved in all those steps, you're going to be increasing your risk, or you're going to be or guessing, right? And so that's really when I look at it, it's just about trying to get that understanding and then translate it.
Right. So when thinking about the UX position, is it one person? Is it one role? Like, what are the different aspects of UX?
Yeah, it can be one person. Like Paul said, he's a generalist, and he's very good at all aspects of the design process. And then there's individuals like me who have come in from a more specialized lens and have stayed kind of in our lane, perhaps you might say. So for me, like I focus very specifically on strategy and information architecture. And I don't do a lot of visual design. It's not a skill set that I've acquired. So it all depends on the individual. It depends on what your team is looking for. Yeah.
I'll add to that. I think that a lot of it depends on the organizational's maturity, not just their business maturity of where the business is at. So whether it's, founder-led startup that's still really, really early, or whether it's an enterprise, if the business maturity is at a certain level, and then on top of that, if their design maturity or UX maturity is at a different level, those things dictate largely what kind of people will be successful. If you have an organization that has a very low level of design maturity and you put in a junior person, they often won't actually be able to make a difference and move the needle. And the flip side of that is if there's a founder who doesn't have any UX chops and they get a junior who can help them push the envelope and help them understand the opportunity, they can really move the needle. So there's those other kind of contextual factors that can really influence what the right person or the right role is.
Mm-hmm.
I think too,
sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Sorry, just kind of touching on what the full spectrum is and what all does UX include. I think that's important to talk about as well. It includes everything from kind of that alignment with business strategy and goals through to user research, so the individuals who actually go out and do qualitative and quantitative research and then do the analysis of the research. There's information architecture, which is the structure, the navigation, and metadata that's used on a digital product to help users find their way around, whether in browser or search mode. There's content strategy. So the people who are really putting the thought into what words are we actually using, and what images are we using, and things like that. There's interaction design, which is kind of how the page actually works. When a user clicks on something, what happens? When they hover over something, what happens? When they swipe, what happens? That kind of a thing. And there's visual design, there's usability testing, there's development. So it really covers the entire range from that moment of conception, like Paul said, all the way through to when you ship a product out the door and then continue to monitor it. It's really, there's UX involvement at every single stage along the way.
Interesting. There's just a question that came up here. The iteration you talk about, like the lean startup method, are you testing and iterating with the end users, or how does that interaction look like?
Yeah, I mean, you can, ideally you're dealing with representative users that are as close to who you're selling or who will be using your experiences as possible. But if you've got a scenario where, you know, it's your cousin, it's your neighbor, it's your whoever, that's close enough, some testing with real people is better than none, right? And so, you know, for years and years and years, I always said, usability testing is insurance, it's risk management. The more you test, or the more accurate your test is, the closer to for sure you can be about the outcome. And so, you know, we used to talk about hallway testing, where you're working, you go down the hall, you grab someone and say, hey, look at this. Can you tell me, you know, what do you think of this? That is, it's all valid and valuable. It's just making sure you consider, don't turn around like, you know, $1 million pivot based on some, you know, hallway discussion. So the right context will give you the right information.
On to that too, in terms of the testing, like at what point, like, are you then, you've got the idea, you've developed the idea, you know, it's in the software, and that's when you do your user testing?
A lot of organizations that have really high levels of UX maturity kind of live by the motto, test early and test often. So you don't just usability test something once. The project that I worked on at the University of Queensland, we had a regular iteration where every 2 weeks, something in our website went to test, something that we were building and designing. And sometimes we would test the same things over, right? So we would test, you know, the functionality of one particular page 1 week, take the findings we had, make some tweaks, come back 2 weeks later and test it again to see if we had actually improved, if we made a difference. So yeah, like the earlier you can get testing, the easier it is to make changes, the more cost effective it is to make changes. So yeah, I think setting up a regular cadence of testing is really helpful. Having users who are readily available and willing to participate at a moment's notice is helpful too. Kind of building a database of participants can be helpful. So yeah.
And it doesn't have to be formal structured usability testing either. I mean, if you have a regular cadence of informal usability testing, you're going to get great value out of that as well.
When should you start user testing?
So usability testing, you want to have an interface. User testing, so user research could be, you know, you could reorient it around that. Honestly, usability testing can happen as soon as any elements of the interface are done. You can use paper and just put a sketch in front of someone and say, hey, what would you do next? So, you know, it's the interface itself, it can be, as soon as it's conceptualized, it can actually be tested.
Yeah, paper prototype testing is one of my favorite things to observe. It's really fascinating to see people actually interact in that way rather than on a screen. Kind of takes them a little bit off the usual approach, and I've gotten some really good insights from that.
How would you say those insights in terms of, you know, when you do have kind of something that is considered a high fidelity prototype or like a digital thing that looks quite polished versus having, you know, a low fidelity prototype, the paper, where it's just more in terms of like the functionality and piece? How do you feel that people react differently?
Well, you have to totally understand how to frame the discussion based on what you're presenting. If you're presenting a low fidelity one, you coach your participant to ensure they're looking at the right things. One of the challenges often with hi-fi prototyping is they actually think it's live or they think it's done. And so you get feedback on the design when you're really looking for interaction design feedback. And so it's, again, that comes back to coaching, right? You know, you have to make sure that people understand what they're looking at and what you're looking for.
Yeah, we got another question here. What can you do as a founder to grow UX maturity in your organization? What can you do as a sole designer to improve UX maturity in your organization?
I think as a founder and someone who has clout within your organization, I think probably one of the biggest ways you can support UX maturity is simply raising the awareness of it and making it an operational priority. It's really hard for individual designers on the ground to make an impact when the top levels of the organization don't back them, don't support them, don't give them budget, don't give them resources. So work with, you know, maybe a UX consultant to come in and say, okay, you know, what's a reasonable budget here that we should be focusing on? What's a reasonable resourcing requirement that we would have? And kind of make a plan to make it a priority.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think as a founder, I think there's kind of 3 principles you can use to grow your maturity. One is, we talked about this as a group, always being curious. So make sure you have a curious mindset. One thing that I've always said is, there's nothing wrong with having strong opinions, but make sure they're loosely held, because if someone has a better idea, you need to take that and go with it. You know, as famous as Steve Jobs is, he was also famous for claiming his smart people's ideas as his own and making him look like the genius. Well, really, it was a team genius. He was just the one who took all the credit for it. And then lastly, thinking about UX is something that evolves. It's not, you know, it's a living, breathing part of everything you're doing. The experience that you are providing can't remain static, because everything changes. Your users change, the business context changes, everything changes. Yeah.
I think the second question you asked, Susanna, around what can you do as the sole designer to improve UX maturity? Honestly, I think it's really just about getting your work out there and talking about it. And, you know, the work that I did at the University of Queensland, I mean, it was a big team. There was, I think, 7 UX designers on it, but I think there's something to be taken from this. We had an entire wall in our office that was devoted to our research findings. We did our user research, and we put up a user journey map that was probably about 30 feet long by about 10 feet tall. And it was a really visual impact that every morning when anyone walked into our office, they walked past that. So get your deliverables out there, share them in direct and indirect ways. You know, try to get involved in new projects. If you hear about a new project that's coming along, say, hey, you know, do you need UX support on that? How can I get involved? And really kind of just making yourself present and available to your team, and showing that there's value to be had.
That's awesome. Thank you. Another question here is, where does UX fit with non-digital products?
Well,
Absolutely. Paul, you want to take the lead?
I will, yeah, for sure. So my current role as a service designer is exactly that. It's looking at experiences as a service and really truly understanding how the non-digital aspects interact with the digital aspects. So Government of Alberta, as you can imagine, there's a lot of non-digital aspects to how the government operates and how citizens interact with the government. And so a lot of my job is getting a better understanding of, well, actually, I was going to say what's working, but there's very few things that are working. So really it's what's not working well, and trying to help both the citizen experience be improved, but also looking at those policy and processes and all the other things behind that are driving, or there could be legacy issues, there could be negative inertia in terms of you know, oh, there's a great term that we use, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Anyways, things that aren't working that create other workarounds that in turn become the accepted way.
Yes.
So anyways, yeah, so a lot of my job is to understand the interaction of that existing kind of real world experience and aligning the digital experiences to help facilitate a better service, right? So service design is that field very much.
I think too, even kind of a subset of service design is kind of that omni-channel design too, right? So I think there's a really big demand and an importance to have seamless omni-channel interaction. So if someone starts out on your website and then they call or they come into an in-person location, that's all kind of part of what service design does. Is it takes a look at those transition points and things like that. So yeah, there's lots of opportunity for UX outside of the digital space.
Definitely, yeah. And it's figuring out what the real problem is, the real problems and real needs of real people, and figuring out those solutions. And yeah, those workarounds, Paul, like those are a very good indicator of this is something that isn't working and people are figuring something else out.
Failure demand. The term I was trying to remember is failure demand. So if
there
there's
you
something
go.
that fails, it creates a different demand. So.
Well done. One of the questions here is, during COVID, what is the best way to conduct user testing?
Yeah, it definitely has presented challenges. I was working in Australia at the beginning of COVID, and we were 2 months away from launching a massive website, the primary marketing platform for the entire university. And we had to switch from in-person user research testing labs to online. There are really great tools that exist out there. As an information architect, one of my primary testing and research tools is a suite called Optimal Workshop. They do testing, the card sorting activities and tree testing, so testing the actual structures of websites, the navigation hierarchies and things like that. So they actually have really great functionality that allows for online testing, both moderated and unmoderated. It can be as simple as, I did some work with Alberta Health Services earlier this year, and we used Zoom. And I gave control of my screen to the participant because it was a site that had not launched yet. So it was all still on our private internal servers. And it was simply a matter of just watching and seeing what they did on the screen themselves. So instead of sitting beside them, I was just on the opposite side of the screen, but it essentially achieved the same outcomes.
Yeah, the reality is with our remote lifestyle now and in the work world, it's exceedingly simple, right? I mean, it used to be a little bit more challenging. You'd have technical challenges with remote screen sharing, and this would be hard and that'd be hard. And honestly, it's kind of been a cakewalk to get usability testing done with everyone now comfortable with this type of interaction. So.
You say that though, Paul, but that work I was doing with Alberta Health Services, we were actually testing the booking tool for COVID immunizations. And of course, the first group to launch was senior citizens.
Of course.
So I was doing user testing with individuals in their 70s and 80s who, I mean, kudos to them. A lot of them had a lot more tech savvy than I would have expected. They were pretty good, but we still had a couple of hangups along the way. People who aren't on Zoom all day for work. They're, out buttering their gardens and missing their grandkids and things like that. And so it was a little different.
For sure. Well, yeah,
I was going to say, when I booked through AHS for my immunization or vaccination, I was really impressed with the interface with like the person walking and the number of people in front of you and your time. I was like, I feel really happy about this interface. So if that was part of it, that's awesome. One of the other questions is, a business can be fairly fluid as it modifies its offering to meet customer needs, or it may have a longer development roadmap. What principles or general standards, if they exist, do you apply to minimize technology/code debt later on?
So I'm a firm believer in that every part of development.
Hey Siri, text Catherine Alberts.
Somebody had their mic on. I'm a firm believer that every part of the technology lifecycle development has an appropriate methodology. So design thinking and lean to start up, and agile for maintenance and for growth. And one of the tenets of agile is, refactoring is a key part of that thing, right? Like you embrace it, you don't avoid it. And so you can minimize technology debt or code debt later on, but you're going to pay for it up front, and you might be strategically directionally challenged. You might have consolidated on the wrong thing depending on what your company does. So when you think about product development, digital product development, that lean and design thinking aspect up front of basically, learn, build, test, and, discovery, and all those other, generative research, as Erica pointed out in the comments, these are all key, absolutely key parts. But then when you get to the point where you're building and you're maintaining, having an agile mindset, even if it's not a formal agile framework of, don't repeat yourself, do what you need to, MVP style, and refactoring as a fact of life tend to generally work well. That's my take.
Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Paul really kind of summarized it pretty well. I don't get super involved in the technology side in my role as kind of the strategist and the information architect. So Paul is certainly much more suited to answer that one.
Awesome. We've got another one here saying that your thoughts around UX as an embedded resource in a development team versus UX as a separate team outside of the development process, and what the pros and cons are for each of those.
I've worked in both environments, and I find that when UX and development are very closely embedded, it lends itself to a really kind of chaotic development experience where design changes are being made after developers have already gone in and started coding. And it can, I found that it gets really messy. I personally prefer the UX, the research and design is kind of decoupled from development. So if you're, say, working in an agile environment, your development team, might be on a 2-week sprint cycle, but often the design team will be 1 or 2 sprints ahead of time, so that those designs are firmed up and finalized and tested and ready to go before they're handed off to the development team. So then the development team can really just kind of get down to business and not spend time doing rework. I think it's important to consult your development team as you're in that design stage, being like, hey, we're thinking of this design. Do you see any major development complications that might come out of this? But to have them really closely embedded can present a lot of challenges from a project management standpoint.
Oh, I'm totally going to take the counterpoint to that.
Okay, let me hear it.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is when you have product teams, they're often, the UX is often embedded as with the development team. The product team has both UX and dev. And there's a lot of advantages in that you can involve your developers with the UX, a lot of the UX exercises. So whether it's a workshop, whether it's collaborative design, if your developer sitting in the room seeing the business or the user actually going through these problems and talking through these problems and getting a deeper understanding of what they're working towards, that challenge of rework or misunderstanding that you sometimes get when developers take over UX work evaporates, because they're then instead of UX people doing UX work and design or developers doing development, then you have the team building something together. And so depending on the team, depending on the makeup of the team, depending on the resources you have, depending on the product, depending on the product manager, you can have an incredibly productive product team with both groups working together.
All right, we got sides on both sides.
I've seen it the other way. I've seen it work both ways. So that's why I took the counterpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick, you make a good point. It depends. Yeah, it always just depends.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing too, right? That the UX is also about the UX of the situation, right? So not two situations are the same. So you have to do the user-centric design about the UX approach as well. Now I know we're getting close to our time here. I wanted to ask, how do you know when you need a UX person, and how do you, why should you hire one, and how do you go about doing that?
It depends. I mean, really? Yeah, I think when do you need one? I think we talked a little bit about this. Like, really, you should be thinking about your user from day one. Whether or not you need a dedicated UX practitioner from day one. it depends a lot on who's in your organization, what types of skill sets your team already has.
How do you figure, like, if you don't, you're like, okay, UX, everyone's talking about UX, you know, we're supposed to have someone for UX, but it's like, I don't like, and all these job postings, like, what do I look for? Like, what do I ask for in someone?
So
it depends, really.
We did talk about this before. So
we did.
I think one of the challenges we're seeing is, I mean, as Calgary's maturity around UX grows, and it's been a long time coming. What we see now is there's a lot of people looking for juniors and intermediates, which is great. There's movement and traction within the market. The challenge is if you get a junior in an organization and you've got a lot of you know, I said this earlier, strong opinions maybe on the development side, it's hard for that junior to do their job because they're going to get pushed down, or they're going to get their voice won't be heard. And so, you know, going back to what's the maturity of your organization, both UX wise and business wise, finding the right role depends on a lot on the organizational culture. It'll depend on the culture. It'll depend on the leadership's ability to manage the inputs that someone from a UX background brings. Because if they can't actually, if it's a good UX person and they're bringing valuable insights, but those are discounted based on the sales guy or based on the tech lead or whoever, you know, it doesn't matter who you have, you won't have the right person. So there's that underlying issue. Once that's solved, you know, honestly, I could probably spend another hour talking about the right time to put the right resource in the right place. So.
No,
yeah,
for
like
sure.
I think, like, if you're asking this question, like, the chances are you don't have anyone in your organization already who is either a dedicated UX practitioner or has some sort of experience or understanding of UX. So yeah, I definitely agree with Paul on that. Like, you need to be getting someone who's senior and someone who can look at it from a very strategic level, to at least get the ball rolling. And then that person can then be a really helpful resource to you to say, okay, we, you know, in addition to me, we also need a dedicated interaction designer, or we need a junior UX generalist who I can kind of coach and guide and things like that. But starting out, you need someone who's got confidence in their skills and in what they can bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Susanna, do we have enough time to address Peter's question? I think there's a lot of interest in it.
Yes, that was my next question. Thank you so much, Gail. Peter's question is, how does ESG, circular economy, community development, investment fit into UX with diversity and inclusion as well?
ESG, that's a term that I'm not super familiar with. Can we get a clarification on our acronym here?
It's environment, social governance, and it's a new metric for determining the end-to-end creation of a product or a service from cradle to grave, including its raw materials through to its disposal. And so it's the circular economy, and it's a new metric for measuring whether we're actually having a positive impact on the environment, our communities, our overall health and wellness, and diversity inclusion. So is that part of user interface, UX design at the highest level when we're talking to management, or is it more software and hardware?
Well, and I can see this is where user experience connects with total systems, right? So it's important consideration.
Anyway,
but yes,
that's the context.
Thank you,
Great question.
Peter.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way that I've always looked at my job as a UX strategist, when I got that hat on, the key to truly, you know, solving a problem is being collaborative, but also not being the expert. The experts around the table, you're understanding their viewpoint, you're helping them make sure their viewpoint jives within whatever experience you're building and reaches the goals. And so again, Erica, who used to work with me, I was lucky to work with Erica, made the comment that generative research is critical. And so when you think about something like this, if you're not doing your generative research at the start of a project to truly understand what the goals of the user are, what the goals of the business are, aligning all those things to creating a tool or a business or a, you know, whatever experience that achieves those goals, creates those value propositions for each of the parties involved. And so whether it's, diversity and inclusion, whether it's ESG, whatever the end goals are, a good process will encompass that, will create the outcomes that drive that, right? If those are the goals. So to me, it's like UX is the process that takes whatever the input is and can create the right output if you have a process to do it, right? And so some UX processes do and some don't, but a highly collaborative and iterative one probably will help with that.
Yeah, and when it comes to the kind of the diversity and inclusion side of it too, I mean, that's the entire point of UX, is that, there's often a phrase that's kind of thrown around that says, you are not your user. We are all different, and we all bring a different lens. We all bring different abilities, different contexts, different histories to an experience. And so the way I experience one thing is completely different from how Susanna might experience something to how Peter might experience something. So diversity and inclusion has always been a pivotal part of UX, and really understanding who are your users, and where, yes, you can create personas that, kind of capture the kind of the essential elements of your users, but ultimately everyone is very different and unique, and so you need to find a way to design in a way that caters to as many of those diversities and differences as possible.
I just wanted to share my screen for a moment, if that's okay. I'm going to just show a photo here that kind of goes to what that was being talked about. Oh, hold on a sec. There we go. Can you guys see that? So it's like the clients and then the users. Yeah. And so it's like, the clients, and this is like, oh yeah, we're having this great idea and this is gonna be so awesome and it's gonna do this really great thing. And, it works. And the baby's like, I'm looking at a bunch of butts. So it's just that perspective of, like, we are not the users. We are not those people that we're trying to help. The other one is this one. Paul brought this to our attention when we were kind of doing some brainstorming, but taking a look at something, and all of us have a different perspective. And so I think it's very important and kind of speaks to what Paul and Rebecca were saying. Do you have anything else to add to that, Paul and Rebecca?
Context is king. That's all I can say. I mean, everyone has a viewpoint, and if you don't understand it, it's hard to do UX.
Yeah,
totally. I'm going to stop sharing now. Just want to be cognizant of the time. If someone is interested in UX and maybe wants to become someone who is doing UX, where should they go? Do you have any advice?
Oh boy.
I mean, places like Calgary UX and Edmonton UX are really great places. The UX community is one of the most warm and welcoming communities I've ever been fortunate to be a part of. I remember when I moved to Calgary, I went to a Calgary UX networking event, and I remember calling one of my best friends before I went in and be like, oh, I hate networking. This is going to be terrible. And she just said, stay for an hour. And if you don't find anyone interesting, you could leave. And so that was kind of my approach going in. And instantly, I met some of the greatest people who have continued to be involved and engaged in my career over the last 6 years. So just getting involved like that. There's always other places to learn. There's LinkedIn Learning and a variety of other kind of massive open online courses. And yeah, I think lots of ways to learn informally.
I was just going to say, I think there's so many courses out there right now, and they can all give you kind of a baseline understanding of the concepts, but it's in the doing. And so it's that informal, whether if you can get an opportunity to work with someone or get a mentor, or get, to me, those are the ways that probably will bear more fruit than taking a Lighthouse Labs course. I hope nobody from Lighthouse Labs on the call. But like, to me, those courses are good, again, for a baseline understanding. A lot of that material is online already. It's the doing. It's actually doing this stuff with someone who knows what they're doing and, can help you understand what questions to ask, what to listen for, what, when not to talk, right? So.
My final question for you today, lovely panelists, is if UX was an equation, what would that equation be?
Oh, goodness. Curiosity is something Paul mentioned early on. If you're not curious, you're not going to get very far in this. curiosity, empathy, creativity, and humility. I would say are kind of the 4 key ingredients.
Nice. How
Wow.
about you, Paul?
I knew you were going to ask me this, and I still don't know the answer. So, you know, years ago in a previous life, I had a company that did this, and we talked about investigating. We talked about investigate. We talked about collaborating, moderating, and iterating. And if you think about those 4 skills and what they mean and what you do through them and how you interact with a team as you do those, to me, those are the core of building a UX. But I think what that doesn't include are things like the delight and empathy and all those other wonderful kind of the experience part. And so I didn't really nail the answer, right? But
I think it also speaks to, you know, just like the breadth of UX, you know, because I think that's one of the things is that sometimes people think it's UX is UI. The UX is really user-centric design, and that can be applied to almost anything. Yeah. Well, thank you ever so much, Rebecca and Paul. I'm so grateful and really appreciate your insights, and to everybody else for your questions and comments. I know we didn't get to everything. What I would like to do is I'm going to try and copy the chat and then reach out to Calgary UX to see if we could get some other answers for some of those questions too. Calgary UX is a group, and I think now it's about 1,900 community members, which is absolutely amazing. So come and check it out. There's Slack, there's the website, there's Facebook, as well as on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Rebecca and Paul, and thank you to everybody. I will hand it back over to Amber.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Susanna. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure having you all here today. We learned so much. There's so many questions. So I think we have time for a breakout room as people are trickling in. I just want to give a big thank you again to Susanna and Paul and Rebecca and Lewis for being here today. We really enjoyed having you. I want to open up the floor for some community announcements. So feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute and yeah, let us know.
Excellent. Is Jade here? Jade often has some events to share, but I don't see if he's still with us. I see Brent. Brent, was that your thumbs up or did you have your hand up? Maybe it was thumbs up.
I think Jade was in our breakout group, but he said he had a 1 o'clock walk and talk, so you may have had to leave for that.
Oh, very good. A walk and talk. Excellent. Well, on that note, I know that there's Clubhouse has a Alberta Tech Leaders event. I know that the times have been, I think, Tuesday at 2, but do check out Clubhouse. It's interesting media. It's actually audio only on your phone, and that can be a walk and talk. But in COVID times, it might be a personal walk and talk. So who knows where that goes. Peter, do you have anything to add?
Just as normal, I've got some really amazing, smart, focused people that understand how to work behind a screen and do amazing things. And they happen to have autism, and it's with a company called Auticon. And so if you're looking for people that can help on projects that have a different perspective, that might be able to dig into something differently than you can imagine, this might be the group for you. So feel free to reach out to me and I'll line you up.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also apologize for the short breakout rooms, but I also wanted to see, drop in the chat or let us know if you'd be interested in having another discussion on UX design. There was lots of chat and a lot of interest today. So we'd be really interested in having you guys back for more conversation, and we want to hear your thoughts on that. So let us know in the chat or in Slack, and Susanna will download the chat, and for anyone else, we'll download the chat with the questions, and you can reach out to us for those. And yeah, so if anyone wants to stay on, we'll stay on and you can chat. We can do some more breakout rooms. It's totally fine, but it is 1 o'clock, so you guys you're free to go. And thank you again so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next week at Lunch Without Lunch. Thank you again.
Thanks, Amber.
Thanks, Amber.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for
Bye.
having me.
Bye.